Here we go. Flags, tribes, alphas, and so much more with Laura J, yours truly, and the Selvavi
Selgovae.
Selgovae Pict. Tell me what that means and refers to, please.
It's a reference to a ancient tribe from Britain and Scotland in the north. Um, they never surrendered to Rome. They're a federation of tribes, and they didn't work under any individual. They would make a coalition to solve problems that affected them all, and then they would break off into their independent bodies thereafter. And they lived under Gnostic rule, Gnostic pre-Roman Christianity.
With Laura J, yours
Sorry.
truly, and that was not meant to be what happened, but we are live on Facebook. So great to be with everyone here. And so the Solgove were a tribe that didn't surrender to Rome and that
Nope.
maintained their autonomy. And this is the tribe that you come from.
Well, my ancestors and many people, not just me. There's just people of their consciousness has forgotten this. We're referred to. There's lost tribes of Israel, and that's many people have forgotten the history, the consciousness. It's been educated to us in a way that suits a system and a state more than it does our individual and natural needs.
Collectivism
Been,
versus individualism, right?
pardon me.
Collectivism versus individualism.
Yeah, that's a way to put it in broad terms. Yeah, there's a requirement for collectivism. It's not that collectivism is evil. It's supposed to be in balance. The system is supposed to respect both the collective and the individual in equal measure. We're getting away from that, and we have for thousands of years.
Yeah. Well, respect has been lost as the foundational currency that we're trading when business got in between us who are actually doing things together.
So, commerce and currency is an interesting subject to go to because in the beginning, if you were my neighbor and you grew blueberries, and I didn't like blueberries, and I had goats and I had milk and cheese. If you came to me with buckets of blueberries saying you wanted milk and cheese, and I said, I hate blueberries, I don't want to trade with you, there was a problem. So they entered currency. They took these metals and they used them as a mediary, as a universal mediary to exchange all these items. And this worked really well with the Phoenicians because of the way that their trade worked. And they would bring goods and wares from abroad. They would bring them in. They would trade this metal. They would get iron or whatever they wanted, and they would trade for salt and spices and stuff. And this power, and this control from this began to be recognized by entities of states of collectives, and they wanted to empower it and control it. You fast forward from then to the Knights Templar, you see the same thing happen again with the Vatican and France, and it's being upset with the Knights Templar and their banking system that they evolved and how powerful they were becoming as a result. And they clipped them, they nipped them, and then and possessed it and rebranded it going forward. And it's not done overnight. The flipping of consciousness can take centuries. You're erasing so much knowledge. You just can't do it in a short period of time. The Inquisitions, that's what the Inquisitions targeted. They targeted the Gnostic knowledge as blasphemy to Rome's variety because it interfered with Rome's control. They couldn't have the two dimensions parallelly operating, and Rome would lose. It's all about theater and representation, and we consent to it. They've changed, and so they've confused us through language, through symbolism, so that we're making these consents tacitly that take us away from God's grace. Remember, our preamble in our charter says recognizing the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And you cannot be in both those dimensions simultaneously in a matter. It's one or the other. So when a police officer walks up to you and says, "Excuse me, ma'am," they're starting into this process where in order to speak to you through the dimension, through the veil, they have to get you to consent to come onto their side. So when they come to you and say, "Excuse me, ma'am," or "Excuse me, miss,"
That's a
they
title.
are coming to you in title. And the second you acknowledge that, you've said, "I'm on your side of the fence." And ignorance is no excuse, whether you meant to or not. Right? So when people say, "I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree," well, that's a contradiction, and it's in the diction. It's a demonstration of ignorance. Well, you cannot understand something and disagree simultaneously. So you're basically saying you're being treasonous by choice, and you're saying you're doing it from within the limits of the state, not outside the limits. So there was a concept that I was working on shortly after Convoy, and it's still in the works of how to articulate it correctly. The phases of protecting your jurisdiction from the moment the state approaches you in authority, and if you're aware of the capacity to which they come to you in. Is it an indictable offense or is it a summary offense? If it's a summary offense, your exit is as simple as saying, "Am I under arrest?" And if they say no, they're doing an investigation. They require you to participate, and you don't have to. You owe the state no duty. So you just say, "I got nothing to say. You have a nice day. Please be safe," and walk away. So as we woke up to this as a collective pre-COVID in 2000, I think it was 2016, they came up with a new type of summary offense called a hybrid summary. What this hybrid summary is the state says, "We know you've done something that's summary, but we believe that we can probably weave that into an indictable if we get to talk to you more. So we're going to come into you under a hybrid, which is somewhere between the two, and it denies you a jury." So they detain you right away. So now you're in a battle of wills with the state, where you're arguing with them over their presumption, which is hybrid, versus your position, which is summary. And when the state chooses to not go indictable, the second the state chooses to not go indictable, you should be then allowed to exit it if you stayed in your capacity throughout. How did you stay in your capacity? You didn't sign nothing, in blue at least. You didn't, or black. You didn't consent to title. You didn't accept the word privilege being put to you or entitled put to you. It's all about the language. It's a literal sandbox stamped at blue to make it true game, played at the adult level with high stakes.
Mhm. So when you said the word indictable, I broke it down the way I do with words and made it in die et for a for and in French, able. So it's the incorporation of what is living and substantial into what is formed and fixed. And so it's really about recognizing that the incorporation of us into these fictitious identities is precisely what you're talking about when an officer of the incorporated law, who is a policy enforcer as part of a repressive ideological state apparatus that reinforces the ideological state apparatus upon which all culture is based. So I actually created a little chart or a pyramid here, and I shared it yesterday in my Telegram group. Which, if anyone's not part of it, I would love for you to all join because it's Peaceful Inner Warriors United Assembly, and great conversations happen there. That's where I converse more than anywhere else online presently. But this right here is the hierarchy of creation from a really broken down perspective, because what it does is it takes the words or the boxes of the words that we've ascribed syntax to the signs of, and it gets back to the energy of what it actually is. So at the very top, you've got all, which many would consider God. But our notion of God is the grantor of domain that actually is about domination compared to dominion. And the difference between the two is an at, which is where the domains come in with the domination, because it's only the claimable land, air, and water that someone in the system is actually able to draw into the public. Because the all that actually created all of us, which is the all and us, that take out the words that have divided so many of us that religions have used to say is the all. But if all is all things, there's nothing the all isn't. So if the all created us, who then created the constructs that we're giving our power to, then we start to see that that's actually separate and is the capstone that is what allows us to stay in our first person pronoun position as the proper or properia persona, which is where we actually stand in the office of man, which is not when we're captain and still can cross our T's and dot our I's. But underneath of us, we have the construct of the de jure government within a res publica, which by definition actually means the public affair or the public thing, because that is where we actually bring things into the frame and then make them names based on Roman nomenclature with the cognomens, surnomens, or surnames, pronomens, and all of these ways that our place in our own story is changed to invite a fictitious entity which has been the holy hand of the Holy See we couldn't see, or the hidden hand of the Holy See we couldn't see, because that's where then we had the flip of an incorporation from a nation state known as a republic we thought was better, but actually the injury to us was when we brought a jury we thought we could trust of people together to judge us, when judgment is of the mind that then finds an outer reflection of what's inside to give back to us what we don't know how to hide from anymore when it starts coming for us through the de facto government of a unidroit usufruct corporatocratic body. And this is where the construct of body being referred to an identity mental construct comes into the frame, because we see that a body of a corporation is not the same as the body of me as I am, which is 3D, compared to that which is the mental construct of a fourth dimensional nature, which is of the mind that we bring into form, because then we use our 3D resources to actually create a two-dimensional counterfeit version of reality that relies on one-dimensional boxes of identities to become the boxes that we check and say, that's what I am, which shifts us from being the first person in our own story to now being the subject to someone else's story based on the glory they got when we dropped our knee to be knighted by their status, title, or change of name that made us no longer who we were before the novation was created, that changed everything we had done before it and started over, like when any kind of name change or status change takes place. So underneath of the de facto government, we've got ISAs, which are ideological state apparatuses, upon which our identities are based, because this is the sociological and economic and all of the ways that we are influenced through religion, education, politics, sports, family, communication, mainstream media, social media platforms, and they're all reinforced by cultural standards, which is the cult you are. And underneath of the cultural standards and expectations that become the status quo that we have to bow down low in order to limbo under, we get into the repressive state ideologies that actually receive their power from the ISAs above them, that says they have the power to do what they need to do to keep society in order. So these are the corporate dogs or pets of the elite class who have used false flag wars to cause dramatic trauma, fear, and harm through loss. And the cops, courts, councils, mafia, and gangs are the instruments used through the men and women that are part of those crews to then incorporate through nature or nation states the sector of public private partnerships that entrap people in limited liability positions that can be stepped into and out of. So basically, what I've come to see is that the roles of identity that we take on are the constructs at the bottom of the trap. The repressive state ideologies or apparatuses then reinforce the ideologies that culturally have been accepted, which is why the saying, while in Rome, do as the Romans do, is to get you under the jurisdiction of speaking the same diction of the fiction that all of this is under, because underneath the capstone of us is everything that has been put into trust within the public, which is a construct. So that is my little lesson about the hierarchy of creation from an ideological perspective.
So at the beginning of that, you talked about difference between indictable and summary. That's how we came into it. And I just want to actually, I'm going to try to narrow that down into simpler terms. Indictable is a trespass against the state or an agent of the state. And a summary is something that's illegal but lawful. It's an awfully lawful offense. And if depending on how you acknowledge, so the state has every reason, because if it's an illegal act, say mischief, a perception or a claim of mischief because you're an opposing of something and you're having a little protest on the sidewalk,
You've
and a
missed.
police officer walks up, the state's objective is to get you out of there no matter what. They'll even take offense to do it, but they'll mitigate it through the way that they act. So when they come up to you and they come to you in title, they're trying to, the second they get that consent, but it's not just that. If you're wearing I am Canadian shirt, or you're wearing a municipality of shirt, or you're wearing a brand, your dream coat has a label, then nobody put that on your back. You did in the morning. You made a choice. And they can presume in that capacity. And so then they just step in and take it, and they leave it up to you to explain it to the justice of peace at your first appearance. And what they're going to do before they get you to that cell is they're going to read you stuff. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you can will be used against. Anything you say can and will be used against you. If you don't have a lawyer, one will be provided for you. Do you understand? And it's a very, very deliberate script, and it's meant to get you to submit. So you have to resist all of that. Not only that, you have to be aware of the fact that your acts matter as well. Whenever a lawyer, if you go online and just lawyer arrested and look up the clips of lawyers being arrested, you're going to see a consistent behavior. They're going to fucking drop to their ass and they're going to be dragged away from wherever they go dead weight. Now, when a police officer interacts with a lawyer, he knows right away that's what they're going to do. That's what they all do. It's known. Your average public citizen does not know that. That keeps you in a jurisdiction. You're being taken under duress. And when you go dead weight in a summary matter where a presumption of jurisdiction is made over you by force, which is omnipotence, and that's illegal and unlawful, then you transfer 100% of the liability of your safety to those who take your liberty from you. They're now accountable for it. Mm-hmm. If you resist in any way, they start to twist or use pressure point control tactics. If you react, and they can, because the optics are that you're resisting, they're waiting to say, no, stop resisting, and then they escalate. And it makes it easier for them to move you then. So when you know this, you'd probably give some background before I go any deeper into what my skill set was in the past. I joined the Army at age 19, and I was a soldier in the Canadian Infantry in two of our regular force regiments until 2002 after September 11th. And I was then recruited by a former SAS operative who ran a private contract security organization, was hired by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to establish a security protection team that was of more recent threat standards. and I was recruited out of the military, and I trained and selected and was put into that. After that, I was selected again to be one of the first 5 Canadians. I can say that at that time in 2005 to be sent to the United States to learn to be a composite adversary team member. And I was a team leader in that for a little while. And basically, we would assess and do mock terrorist attacks on nuclear infrastructure in Canada. And then we would give feedback as to how to better harden the target, I guess is the simplest way to put it. So when I'm coming to you about these jurisdictional matters, it's from a position of how we used to unpack, dissect all of that. And when I did this training, my adversaries who I was the adversary for was the on-site security force that's armed, the OPP True Team, the OPP ERT team or common adversaries, RCMP cert if it was something that was in New Brunswick or like that. So there was a lot of knowledge that came out of jurisdictional control. Now, I've been subject to 6 dynamic arrests between 2021 and 2022. Always a SWAT team on me. I'm unarmed. I turn my guns in advance of my awakening and starting to change things. Understanding how we interact with the police is an incredibly key element to limiting the ability of the state to pull funds from us. Mm-hmm. The second they put a charge on you and you lawyer up, you've just signed up for a minimum of 10, anywhere from 5 to 15 grand on a summary offense that's going to go to a lawyer in the province or jurisdiction that claims over you. And it happens the minute that you call a duty counsel lawyer, and that duty counsel lawyer says just this to you: say nothing until tomorrow. That's all you get when you make that phone call. They tell you what common sense should have told you in the beginning. So understanding how to be arrested removes and defangs a lot of the process that the state has. If done politely and correctly with the state, because police are now starting to wake up a bit more to how this plays out, then you nip it in the bud. The police officer he's limited by his oath or her oath. They're a limited entity. They have limited liability, and they have discretion. So those 3 elements right there, if you appeal to the human side of them correctly, and human means enlightened, and you speak correctly, they'll know that you know, and they don't even want to go through the drama of trying to fucking test case you. They'd rather avoid it on a summary matter involving a sign. There's 50 people standing around. They'll go to the next one. An interesting dynamic that I noticed when I watched, in particular, the Soji protesting that was going on. I was analyzing it, and I was consistently, and I think people would agree with me, seeing that the people who were we would refer to as the right were confronted by the police mostly, and the people that we would consider on the left weren't touched. And the reason why is because that element on that side is now aware of this language that I'm speaking about. They know the capacity, and the Human Rights Commission has just created a term called dead name. If you look in the terms of definitions that they use, dead name, it's reserved specifically for everybody but a heterosexual white person. and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It is literally like that. You can interpret it as LGBTQS plus. Well, it's every single genre of consideration except for a Christian Caucasian individual. And so in that dead name, you can lowercase your name, which means you don't capitalize it. And the proof is, if you were to go on to Rebel News, did a thing about the Toronto police having awareness training. Not to give Rebel News any credibility, I'm not doing in that regard. But what's interesting is they actually showed the person that was of the LGBTQ plus instructor familiarizer that did the familiarized training for the police. Their name, and specifically their name, was done all in lowercase, and for the purpose of not associating with the crown. So that immediately removes all summary offenses. Freedom of speech is universal. They get to do everything. And when the police approach them, they know not only are they going to be fighting them on their genre of belief, but the argument that they put behind it. And it's so the police are walking on a very, very narrow tightrope as well. And yeah, the just doing my job part is a bullshit excuse, and it's an element. But I mean, get all that out of it, and then so once we realize that when we speak correctly on the matter in the moment, you understand whether you're doing something that's indictable or summary. If it's summary, it requires a consent. The only way they're going to get consent is through ignorance. There's 3 types of rights in Canada. Everybody thinks there's 2. There's 3. There's human rights, there's civil rights, and there's natural rights. Civil rights are for the entitled and the ignorant. After that, so that's the limited rights. And the 2 larger capacity rights, which have the exact same capacity, are civil and natural. Are human and natural. If you claim that you want human rights, the prefix "hu" means enlightened, and that can be tested. And that's where they come at you with the words, the jurisdiction. Your words will be used against you. So what you say and how you feel and how that marriages up and comes out of your mouth, how they interpret it isn't guaranteed from your end.
Of course not.
They're going to apply their rule to that language.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to control and own you because you're only perceived from that point forward. Your reality is as you speak, not how you draw, not how you, it's how you speak.
Clarification.
Or you get somebody to speak for you and they possess you.
Right.
In the matter only. You sign over the matter to that individual and then they possess you. And here's the great proof of it. When you go to court, and I've tested this, I've had ADRT officers standing around waiting for me to cross this magic line on the floor so they could search me. And I was sitting with a supporter, Erin, bless her heart, and I'm sitting at a chair in the Walkerton court, and I got my suitcase, my old briefcase beside me, and they got a tea cart just for me. They bring out this little tea cart, and Garrett wanted. It's quite cute because, as I told you, who I am, and if they perceive this threat, that is such a ridiculous setup to prevent any kind of thing. But anyway, I sit there and I wait, and she says, "Are you coming in?" And I said, "No." And then the police officer says, "Can I search your case?" I said, "Well, I haven't crossed your line on the floor yet, so I'm fine right now." So they accepted that and they stood there. So that's interesting, number one, because if I had a bomb in there, right? So they accept that consent. It's not the fear thing they were going for. They were trying to capture me into a capacity. So I watch a couple people go through, and then a lawyer comes and just walks right through. Blazes. I look at Aaron and I said, "Let's go." I grab my case and I go to stand up, walk. Of course, they stopped me. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. What are you doing? That lawyer just walked through. Yeah, but they're part of the court. I said, no, they're presenting. They're coming in and they're presenting and they're going to represent another individual, just like me, because I'm here in my full capacity. Oh, no, we got to search it. We got to search it. Safety protocol. I said, do you not think you guys know who I am? Every time you come to me, you got these guys, and I point to all the ERT. They're the ones that do it for you. Every time, 100% of the time, I monitor. This conversation is being watched and analyzed as we speak. I promise you.
Of course.
So I said to the court police officer, who's a sheriff, right? They're sheriffs. I said, "Are you a public servant?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Interesting." And so this whole exchange right here is really just a summary matter as we stand right now. And he says, "Yes." And I said, "Who's the master of the being that's standing in front of you right now in this matter that we're discussing?" And he's like, and then the ERT guys say, "Come on, we got to get you out of here now. You're talking too much." They pushed me out the door. So then I had to call into the court, and I called into the court clerk and I said, "Hey," I said, "you guys are putting an impotence over me. I'm trying to get in there to make my appearance, to defend myself, and you weren't letting me. You're telling me before I get there, I have to give up a whole bunch of rights. And I'm not here in that capacity at all." And she goes, "Yes." And I said, "Well, then, if that's what you're doing, I want it in writing.
Good for you.
I want you, I'll come in, I'll do all that. But before I go through that line, I'm going to walk into your clerk's office and you're going to give me a letter signed that says that that's what I got to do or else."
Yeah,
And she
absolutely.
did. And I took it. So now I walked in and I went through the search. I protested it, and every time thereafter, I just filed a letter up saying, and it's all about creating that omnipotence. But then right now, the first people that work in this, and I'm working on, I would consider what I'm doing in the kind of risky. I wouldn't encourage people to kind of take some of the risks that I do in the way that I do, especially while considering the world's largest nuclear power plant is my adversary, and yours vicariously as a result, because they're involved in a lot of for the control politics in the province of Ontario. They provide 30% of the province's power. They're owned by Omers and Vanguard. It's the unions, the Power Workers Union, and the Society of Nuclear Professionals own 5% of Bruce Power. And Bruce Power generates $3.5 billion a year. And that 5% represents $175 million a year for each one, the management of the workers and the workers. So when anybody in the union goes to the union for succor in a matter, the union's going to make a shareholder decision on it. They're biased. And at the same time, they're going to tell these workers, we only owe you a duty of collective fairness. We got to do what's good for everybody. But the thing is when you look up that term, what its limits are in law, you cannot say it if you're in a position of bias. Yes, there's a maximum in law in the, we call it the civil juris, but it's really the civil iuris. It's not J. J is a fiction. So in the original maxims, let those deceived be so. Basically, it's not rape until you fucking define that it is. Until then, it's presumed you like it. Rough. So in that thinking, the check to that is the other maxim. That's the bias maxim. Nemo judex in causa sua in Latin. And that means what they're doing is biased and that's unlawful. And it could be argued all the way into human trafficking, which brings you to the United States-Mexico trade deal. And then 30% of the province's power gets looking pretty scary. Or not, right? It all depends. But jurisdictions, full circle, I went on a tangent there. The jurisdiction part of it at the beginning is the second that a police officer walks up. So if you're just saying something that somebody doesn't like, and you're trying to figure out, how is it that we have universal freedom of speech, but I got the police knocking on my door? It's because you're in your registered property, you're driving around in your registered car, and all these registrations, when they come on that matter, allows them a presumption that if you do it there, you do it with everything until you speak out of it.
Well, it's the usufruct.
Pardon me?
It's the usufruct. It's the quasi-usufruct and the imperfect usufruct that allows us to be fruct, which means to extract the fruits from the fruit of the tree that is harvested, which is the quarry of a rich source, which we are. So the usufruct has three main ways that we can use others' property, which is uses.
Yeah. In history, the applications in history are as simple as this. When Constantine had the sign given to him and they put it on the shields, the chi rho, and the other force would not attack that symbol because it meant something to them. That's why you don't worship idols.
Yeah.
That's why in spirituality you don't worship idols. You don't pick a shade. You don't stand in fucking one thing and then fight everything else off, because you fall prey to being limited by it. The shields, when they raised the shields, the people wouldn't attack that symbol. That's how they won that day. When the Psalter happened at Macbeth, when they put they looked up and saw the cross in the sky. That was based on the tale that Constantine went there, met the people, came back, said, "How are we going to take him out?" And it was through consciousness. In 832, Chinese monks had already figured out how to make gunpowder and fire rockets off in the sky in a limited distance. And they coordinated that. That was just a play on ignorant minds. And they were like, it's a miracle. It's just fucking with people. They were actually, because they're the Tuath Danann originally, and they were known as druids and people who had an understanding of nature. a representation of it that they couldn't interpret because they felt that they were so enlightened. They couldn't imagine that Rome would outsmart them with nature. Everything that Rome brought was a refabrication. It was easy to tell, But when they started throwing clouds in the skies, that was beyond definition, and that's why you have your St. Andrew's cross today. And it was a ruse. It's
So
one of the fundamental tactics. When Rome first took over Egypt, the pineal gland of the entire world at that time was Alexandria, and it had this pesky to Rome culture that lived around it, a black culture that were known as the Phaeumic Coptics. And in their tongue, the word for man is Roma. So it's the first tacit consent. The state Rome, under their law, would walk up and say, "Are you Rome?" And they go, "Yeah." And they'd say, "Come with us." And off they'd go into the legions or into the Colosseums. Over time, they converted their consciousness. And then when you fast forward to 280, I think it was 284 AD, Rome called for the entire Theban legion plus 600 more. So they took every man of fighting age of the Coptic tribes of the Phaeumics and St. Maurice and pulled them up the Gaul I think it was near Switzerland. And that's where Emperor Maximian told them, "We want you to sacrifice Christians." Again, the symbolism of that act, they couldn't break it, and they knew it. Rome set them up, isolated them from their land and all connection of empathy around them. They came up there with the spear of destiny that St. Maurice carried. And then he said to them, "We want you to sacrifice these Christians that we've captured before we go to battle. These unarmed Christians, slaughter them in celebration of the emperor." And that's where St. Maurice said, "We can't do that." That's like, we can't do that. And they were decimated. 1 in every 10 was pulled out, slaughtered in front of his peers. And they did that 2 more times. And on the third one, St. Maurice made his famous speech where he said, "The emperor has given us a wage and participation in the citizenship of his state and empire, and for that we are grateful. However, the creator has given us life. And one means nothing without respecting the duties of the other." So he ordered all his men to drop their swords at that time, and they all dropped, and they all bled out that day. And this is now symbolic in the oath, the police officer's oath to the Constitution. All right, and that spear for us, literally in court, in their theater of representation, is past the gate, which is no longer there. Go into a courtroom, you won't see a gate no more. They flooded the whole room. You think you're walking into a separate jurisdiction on one side, you're not. You're standing in a fucking sectional swim. There's a deep end and a shallow end. The flag's gone. The Canadian flag is not there. So all binding presence of representation of your Constitution is not in the courtroom. The judge applies a discretion that's unbiased to the state because the corporate shield is still there. And all that is about equity. And that binds them. So if you're not aware of these things, you're not being raped. You're just playing in the waiting pool, and the lifeguard, who's the judge sitting up there, is telling you what to do. And we need to speak to that. These petitions about Trudeau getting out of there, great. But the next man or woman that steps up into his job or position is going to step into the same set of theater, and they're going to have the same controls or lack of over you.
it's figureheads, and it's not over me, it's over my third person pronoun of the creations that the corporation.
Laura, I agree. I agree that, and I tell you that I agree with you. But there comes a point in conflict and warfare, in particular, where that doesn't mean shit. The guy with the most guns and the biggest and most hardest and ready to move people control. That's coercion. That's the position I'm in.
Yeah.
I sit in a courtroom with 8 in black tactical team guys within arm's reach of me, and a set of rules of escalation that if I misbehave, I will be quickly, and they've demonstrated it. Like, I've had guns in my face. I've never been armed. I've never been. I turned my guns in before I started speaking.
Yeah, and they
It's simply their perception of what I can do because of what they trained me. And they
well,
don't want anybody to acknowledge that or be aware of it because that makes their problem a whole lot worse. So they downplay it. And then, but at the same time they downplay it, they jump on me like I'm a biker boss or something.
of course. How many times have they tried to get you to do a mental health evaluation?
So when the court processes started in 2021, the first thing that happened was a firearms prohibition. That was the first part of the escalation. And that's where I got them on the human rights trafficking because they when they first created this unit, there was such a panic and they wanted me. All I had at the time was my long form birth certificate. And so when they said whenever a company says they need citizenship proof, it's exactly that. They want citizenship. They want to see that you're bondable. So they expect you to give them your short form birth certificate. But I gave them my long form one, and they were in such a panic, and they needed numbers. I guess I don't know, but they accepted it. So they accepted the natural man. This is how it all came full circle, right? Because when they put the firearms prohibition on me, I said, I've already turned my guns in and I've already told a psychiatrist and I'm about to call you out. And I told the psychiatrist, the very first thing you're going to do is cry fear because it's John Rambo on acid's upset. And so like you can't come running up to me like this. And I've consistently reminded you that there's no danger to nothing. I'm just going to start telling awkward truth. And they don't like what I'm saying out loud.
Yeah, it is threatening.
They spend millions upon millions of dollars on an image. Let me say that again. They spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to convince you of something.
Mm-hmm.
If it was true, they wouldn't need to do that.
No,
It'd be,
absolutely.
it'd be evident.
But logo,
So they put everybody in servitude, as golden handcuffs. And anyway, when went to go get that, of course they wouldn't let me have it. They destroyed it. They gave me a fraudulent short form one, which was easy to prove in the moment. And then I reminded him, I said, you know what? This is getting really bad for you, see, because denying me my other one, apart from stealing my property, you've committed 27903 of the criminal code, which is human trafficking by document. And you've handed me a fucking forgery of a federal banknote at the same fucking. Both of these carry up to 14 years. Actually, one starts at 14 years, believe it or not. It's the fraud. The human trafficking part, you can get up to 14 years, I think.
so with that though, that would only apply to the man or woman whose name was actually on the documents that could be infallibly proven to have been involved through signatures that become the sign at your own risk lines that people sign away their lives on.
Yeah, no, and so what they accepted when they first hired me in 2002 into their organization. So the private security organization took me as such, and then they handed my file over to the nuclear industry, and then CNSC vetted all those documents, Canadian Nuclear Safety Council, and because of the role that I played, it was either 3 or 5 years thereafter they review it again. So when the guy gives me fast forward when I asked for my document back in 2021 when I went on site for it, and they were in a panic and they didn't want to give it to me because of what it proved. It's prima facie proof in court when you go in with your long form birth certificate that you're a different entity before them than what they want you to be. It's prima facie proof. It's look it up. It's matter of fact, tangible. In their contract law, they can't avoid that. You can float on that if you do it correctly. But when we're taught as children in school, we're not taught all the symbolism. We're not taught why that red line is called a margin and what goes in there. Truth takes few words. We're not taught any of that. Why the blue line underlines everything. Why we underline in certain colors and other colors. Why we use black or blue ink only. Nobody
Purple.
gets it. But it matters. It matters huge. And I always give people an example. If you think I'm being silly, next time you go to the bank and you have to sign a contract, when they offer you a pen, say, no, I brought one with me, pull out a red pen, and then start to sign. And then watch the reaction you get. And then ask them if there's even one of those in the room. They're not even gonna want to look at the red pen. Why? Well, you're taught that red pen in school. A lot of people will say different things. If you say, "What does the red ink mean?" and they're going to say, if you get your test paper back and it has red ink on it, it means an error. I get that commonly, so I'll use that as an example because that's the extreme I want to show an example to. Is in fact, no, it's not. It's truth ink. They give you the truth.
Mhm.
They write the truth in it. When you open a Bible, the red lettering is what? It's God's word. So that's the symbolism and the power of that symbolism in their theater. I've signed out in red to test it once at the police, and then they've called me back for fingerprints and told me they wanted me to sign again and only given me the option of a fucking black pen.
Well, the error is the air, HIER or HEIR,
I think you're correct. I know
or
you're correct, but that is that dictional breakdown is actually the layer that I think where a lot of people get lost.
mhm.
When I found myself that when I explain to people the simple is if I try to do it simply, and I think we've had conversations, we both struggle with
Oh yeah.
it because it is such a spider's web of tendrils. This is because of this, because of that, because of this, because of that, because of and people's eyes just cross. You can watch them fog over as you're talking to them, and it's painful. So I find that the easiest way to do it. I studied some of the people that do it on a very veneer level. Christopher James is one individual that kind of sticks to the basics over and over and over again. And I find that when you stick to those general principle basics, you get it into a dumbed down laundry list that the system can't deny in a moment, even if they know that you're just reading off a cue card. They can't lie. So um, people hopefully expand on their own from there. The word games, like the break, like you're saying, of error and the interpretations of words forwards and backwards, emotion. And then when you say the word emotion, people are like, oh, and it's like, well, wait a minute, let's read it like a Hebrew. No I to me.
What's he brewing? No I to
Huh?
me. I said, what's he brewing? Hebrew?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. The English is an incredibly sinister language by design. The duality
The
and the
science.
similarities and the suffixes and prefixes and how every word breaks down into a couple words and then the letters break down into a story. So what it, when you get into that conversation, that thread of conversation around jurisdiction, this is the arena that lawyers exploit through the fear of conspiracy and all of this. You can run you can run in opposition to other individuals on such a trivial matter about how something is interpreted. And scholars do it all the fucking time. Everybody thinks 666 is the number of the beast, but it's more likely 616. So
I've heard it to be that the signs themselves that each represented the what became translated to be the numbers were actually the name, title, and mark, which all tie into Roman nomenclature. So each of the characters.
so the mark goes to the Tav, right? The Tav. There was no Alpha and Omega. That's a Greek interpretation. Christ wasn't a Greek, and neither was a God, and neither was the individual that created the written word. Because if we're going to turn around and start waving a Bible in the air and saying that this is beating our heads with it, and that's fine, and it is true, but it's hidden, it's encoded with an allegory that can transcend time, and then with twists put in it deliberately over time to hide it even more with intention. So if you want to go back to the beginning of it all, and we discussed this before, I'll bring it up now for whoever you share this with. The first person to create a letter was Enheadwana. Well, who we refer to as Enheadwana, known as she who wrote. And if you take the name Enheadwana and break it down into its parts, it's in he of Anna. And that's the daughter, who we call the daughter of the emperor of the first civilization, Sargon the Great, the gardener. And if we look at the fact that at that time, and the reason why today everything's mankind, man's property, man, child, all of that, is because only men had property, and women, the word woman, wife of, it's a title. That's why a Supreme Court judge can't define what one is because it's a title of consent, of covenant. I'm the wife of the creator. So getting into the diction of it all, understanding the first vowel, L, ever made is the letter I. And that's a number one, as we recognize as a number one with a dot above it. In an uppercase, it's the Roman numeral one. And that's interesting because when you start talking about every one in our law, section 7, every one is one word. And in the criminal summary offense, it's every space one. Who without lawful excuse? Well, the lawful excuse is the capacity to which you stand in. And the one's the registered number. And every one at the beginning of section 7 is a collection of individuals. That's not the same thing. It's not. So we have to be able to speak to that. And how that happens is through our acts tacitly, our consents tacitly. Your tongue is deceiving you, and that's because you never shaped it. Nor did you shape the conscious sympathetic reactions that are stirred from the spelling that is cast. It's real. It's magic. Magi stuff. Real. So you're possessed. The vampire stories, Bram Stoker's and all that, they don't get you unless you let them in. Well, and ignorance is no excuse. When you were your parents' property, if they didn't program you correctly, that's their fault.
Well, we've got the monarchs' trauma based slave programming of the Illuminati and the.
So the step away from monarchy began long ago. The abuse of it. The stone was taken before the queen was coronated, and she never got the real one back. And we've been living in a fraud for a while now. That's this great awakening.
Well, yeah,
She
obviously.
was dead. She was dead before Corona hit. The very word Corona is the first part of coronation.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all about 1/6 of the planet was in her control. Currency, the bar register, like fuck, it's huge.
Well, the crown is the crown chakra though, and if we're capped in our consciousness by the capitalized crown of the monarch, of the construct of a supreme governance that is biologically based through hereditary descent and all of
What
the
we now call primitive people of the lands all over the world all have feathers in their headdress to represent the spirituality and transcendence of a higher thought. And ceremonial burial rites, that's it. Like where you find the first ceremonial burial, you're going to find the beginning of a submission to a greater consciousness,
well
and
submitting
that's found in the steps.
to the mission of the higher consciousness is the point that I was trying to make about the crown being capitalized, being an externalized version of what we actually have within the vessel that transports the God spark within us as the
Mhm.
individuated expression of the divine, that we are the Wi-Fi too. So when you
Mhm.
were the wife of the creator, it's just like my mind kind of went in a couple different directions for a moment until it was going back to the resonance of vibration and frequency. And to see that when we are the wifey of the creator, then we become the conduit that is an antenna that is sending out our heart's desires to sire those desires in the 3D through the cooperative parts of people, places, and things in our environment.
That's why Wellington came up with rubber boots. Control.
Why?
Rubber boots removes you from that earth resonance, right?
Oh,
Rubber soles takes that away. You have a body of troops and you're giving them a command, and their moral energy that's resonating through the earth is all pinging them and in unison telling them at the same, it's like a song. It's the same thing as playing a harp. So when you take that away and you put them into a fight or flight, but head or stomach decision process more. So they've put rubber soles on their feet for that same reason. If you're aware of that it's there, you can manage it. But if you're not aware of there and you go through a lifetime of not knowing that, then your individual survival part kicks in. I had an interesting debate with a lady the other day online. She was talking about how like her faith is that, and pressing your palms together and praying to the stars will change the world, and that's all everybody needs to do, and it brings her peace if nothing else. And I said, well, that's nice that brings you peace, but it does nothing for your neighbor. So in this dimension, this individualism, when everybody makes a big tsunami for separate and cut myself from the collective and free and ultimately master of my own destiny, that's an unbalanced approach.
of course.
And the best we're going to find in this dimension of existence is balance. And the second we get balance and say, you know what, it would be more comfortable if I did this. He is only going to cost my neighbor a little bit, but I'm going to fucking nail barely notice. And it doesn't come back. It just keeps going on time. And they bank on it. This collective body, there's always going to be someone who wants to ride it themselves.
Oh yeah. Well, it's the bulla of the seals that
And
are
that's why it's the collective's responsibility, the body's responsibility to vomit it out, shit it out, sweat it out, but get the fuck rid of it, or bring it back into the collective in a different way and check itself back to balance.
recycle it.
We're in a tough spot, and I believe that one of the keystone act that's very simple. It's nonviolent, and anybody anywhere could do it, and it's actually about, dare I say it, a civil duty to do it, is to go to the court and calmly just walk into a courtroom and sit down while it's in session. And even though everybody's volunteering to be Zoom, you as the public are present and you want to see those clerks sitting in there. You want to see that. You have a right. They have to put that theater for you to observe in real time. They're obligated. They're trying to get away from that. And as you talk on this screen, you don't know if there's a flag to the left of you as you sit or not. And does it really matter? Because when it's all reversed and I look at it the other way and the flag's on this side, whose perception matters? You see what I'm saying? Because where that flag sits is important too. It's got to be to the left where you see him.
And what's that about again?
And if there's two flags present, so in the provincial court, there would be two flags present. And to the left of the judge should be the Canadian flag, and to the right should be the Ontario flag. And above their head should be the corporate shield. And everything there has a binding purpose upon everybody in there. If that Canadian flag isn't there, your Canadian Constitution, your Charter of Rights, your BNA, all of it, not one bit of it, not even a Westminster statue sitting in that room. Well, maybe. No, I'm not sure, because the Equity Shield has a crown on it, so maybe it still holds that in there. But again, you shouldn't have to argue to all of that. The judge is supposed to be acting without fear, but the Treasury Board president directed him to move it or else. Policy on Communications and Federal Identity, Section 2.2. And when you're done reading that, read Section 7, because that's the consequences. And it's right up to persona non grata in the end. So it doesn't matter how big your title is, welcome to mediocrity. You can be the top of the bottom of the barrel. And they hate that. They're terrified of it. They spent their whole lives invested into that jacket and title, and someone just walks up and strips it off their back rudely. Jordan Peterson. He's in that fucking groove right now. Yeah, he's set himself up a nice nest egg to kind of leverage that. But just the same, it was his title, his doctorate, all of that. And they took it.
Well, they
We'll
gave
do it to a judge in a moment.
Absolutely. This is what everyone's going to face.
So the judges aren't acting without fear at all. When that flag's not there, they can't. And they're doing it under direction. They're doing it under state direction. I said to a judge in court, do you work within the body of the monarchy? Are you a representative of the crown? And he said, yes. And I said, then you have as much responsibility to the rule of God the law of God as you do to the rule of law. An
Which
equal standing. How do you determine which one's which? There's no God in court. What? I just about lost my shit. That's when Berg and Pete got carried out because Berg gasped and he swept the whole courtroom. I'm like, how is it if there's only one process of law and you're God? You know, why do we even have the term habeas corpus, and why do I got money in my front pocket? Because you're suggesting that there's no choices. Like
he's
it's
suggesting that he's the liege lord underneath of the monarch.
I don't care what he calls himself. I
It's
couldn't give a flying fuck if he calls him. I don't care what he calls himself.
yes,
He is saying he's omnipotent in the moment. He's saying he has enough power to tell the police officer, pull a holster out, unholster a gun, whack me in the center of the court, and nobody's going to hold him accountable. It's akin to that.
yes, but that's because if you're putting a judge on notice, or if you're holding a judge responsible, or trying to put some entity on notice, you're going after a fiction which has no legs to stand on.
Well, no, again,
That
no, wait a sec, stop.
office.
Stop the whole talk about state and all that. Again, we exist in a land that has this fictional judiciary that runs over. I agree, but we're being the balance between collective. So now I have to argue to the collective as to why I'm an individual in this matter and have greater capacity. So I'm present to speak to that because I served 14 fucking years to protect that with my life for fuck all too. By the way, I think my best year in the army was like 47 grand. I think it was once on a tour I would get on a tour at the time would be 47 grand as a corporal. So like it's no big fucking thing there. I did it because I believed in what I was doing. Section 8 of our fucking Interpretation Act. Section 8 of our interpretation says the common law and the civil process have equal words that affect inequality, have the same consideration in the matter. Again, it boils down to what I was doing, summary or indictable. And it was summary. It was art. And it was declared as art. I sent a song and I said, let's unpack my art. And I sent a song. And they interpreted it as a death threat. And I'm like, well, that's fucking hilarious. When Spielberg going to trial. Like, fuck me. What are you talking about? And I challenged the freedom of expression up front because they underestimated me based on the capacity. Because they profiled me when they hired me for that job. I only have a grade 9 academic on paper, but I have a doctorate in weird stuff that I learned about stuff. So, and within the system. And so that's kind of one of the things that they play on people,
Mhm.
right?
Really
Because it's all perception. It's all about smoke and mirrors and perception. Security for any organization, if you're a business and you need to apply security is a parasite and a cost. And you can never have enough. There's always a way. So then what's the reasonable setting? Where's the standard set at? What is considered in the greater scope of things a responsible amount of time would be a key word, and hardening that would and so through that lens you begin to see a weakness. The system is it bleeds a couple things. It bleeds money and it bleeds time. Okay, it loves using time in its advantage, but if it's losing time and money simultaneously, that machine can't turn as fast as it would like to, and it's fucking slow to begin with. And when a collective walks into the courts, in every jurisdiction, every little court here, just one person a week is all it takes. Twice a week, 2 different individuals go into a courtroom and just say, excuse me, I'd like to watch it present. Thank you. Before we put everybody's rights under, can I ask a question? Why is there no flag here? Don't flip the court upside down. Just ask the question. They're gonna cringe because you asked the question.
And the one
Don't make a
asking,
big standing out. They're gonna dismiss it. You can just say that's interesting and then walk away and leave it. think about it, maybe approach it differently with somebody else another time.
To find the names of those that are acting within courts that do not have the proper logos to brandish their brands of piracy, those people in their private capacity get put on notice who step into a public office for a time and leave it. If you
Yeah,
put,
but who's gonna educate it? Who's gonna educate it? Who's gonna do the seizures? Who's gonna compensate the other one?
this is what we're creating. It doesn't exist currently because the existing system is corrupted. We need
Well, so here's the thing, Laura, is
foundation.
why you're saying you're creating this and you create a constabulary. Just let me finish. If you at some point there's gonna have to be a bailiff, a sheriff, somebody that's gonna have to walk in and say, or else. If you don't have that body, that other body that you're facing isn't gonna do nothing.
If we're facing a real body, we see eyes looking back at us, and we are actually connecting to something that is real, not in reels that are reeling us in with a hunting and fishing game, or on social media with the reels that are stealing our team that way. But when we're real, that's when we can be in our private capacity and say the public prying eyes don't need to get involved in private matters. They have no business there unless they make it their business, in which case profits are then being made off of the man or woman whose name is
Yeah,
on.
I don't argue any of that. I agree with everything you're saying. Where I'm saying I see a stall in this is the part where rubber meets the road. They're found in a fence, and it comes time to collect what's owed to you. And if you're going to do it through a parallel, separate running of the people system,
That's not what I'm
you're
proposing.
asking for conflict. The only way it's going to happen is through physical interaction, and that's where the spark in the Civil War starts. So you can't let that happen. It's the fucking opposite of what we want to happen. We have a good system, but it's been used and weaponized against us. Why? Because the way that we live here, if you were born here and have two generations from here, you can't even properly imagine what people are fleeing from to live here. And of that demographic, I'm positive that a bunch of them are grateful and they're trying to assimilate, fit in, do everything. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what I'm saying is there's a body of them that says, "Holy fuck, all you get is like 90 days for that on the first offense. Are you kidding me?" And it's worth it.
It's different cultures.
It's a reasonable risk to take.
This is the melting pot construct of these ISAs of the cultural influences of ideologies that say 90 days to do a crime that has the potential to pay out this dividend, to divide me in the end, to get this dividend payout now at the expense of my soul long term, is the way that the repressive ideologies or the repressive state apparatuses are required in order to uphold this, which is what you devoted 14 years of your life to protect and defend because you believed in it, not because you did it for the money. So you have an entrenchment within the ideological state apparatus of the construct that you were immersed in, plus all of the extra
Well,
doctrines or doctorates outside of the realm of academia. You have went down rabbit holes that most people don't have the capacity to do, and you're incredibly knowledgeable. And I say this because we've had conversations and it's like we both lose people because we're at a not higher level, but we're going to places that most people find so far out and so unfamiliar that their nervous system can shut down before they actually catch up with us in the moment. But my
people
point
don't believe the words that we use and they don't understand them. If I
is,
say ET, right? If you say ET, just listen like a child, you talk to a child, say, "What's an ET?" They're going to tell you it's a Martian from outer space. And without even unpacking the words, with no understanding of what, blah, 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 what they say, none. They're
this,
talking about an extra Earth entity. That's you and your person. You're fucking alien. You're alien.
yeah,
It's in the Ten Commandments now. They just wrote it.
the Bible is a codex. It's a companion manual to the
Yeah.
Justinian Codex upon which the legal fiction is based. which was where the res publica of the public affair or public thing became part of the fictitious identities that we then get into conflicts with one another to try to defend the ideations and ideologies that we have identity vested in, which is the issue. And essentially, all of what we're facing, and even talking about the POG primer with the public private partnerships, that is directing the roles that people step into and out of, which mean there's nothing
Fine.
actually there until the names are brought in and we're actually held to account. So the day of reckoning, I reckon we call it ourselves instead of wait for
Well,
the aftermath.
listen, what I like about the POG primer is this: it brings people into a forum. A couple awkward, hard questions are asked. They're put on the record. Answers aren't given, and anybody that sees that thereafter goes and starts scratching at the surface. You and I can dig holes to China. Doesn't mean everybody's going to want to follow that hole with us. So most won't. Most will look back in time and say, "This is good enough. Right here is good enough." Again, the letter J wasn't invented until 1524. The letter J wasn't even fucking imagined until 1524. And 8 years after that, the Latin Bible was written with an asterisk as well, reinvoked from 2,000 years prior. And this all speaks to the power of this stuff. Yes, it's very important. The asterisk, the little star above the 8 on your keyboard. Yeah,
What
asterisk.
of it? I know what it is,
It's the
but
8-pointed star above your 8. It's an invocation. So if I write in something and I'm sort of vague or I want to condense it, I'll just go blah blah, and then I'll put an asterisk beside it. And at the bottom of the page, it's like a footnote, and then it'll be a bibliography type reference to where you can find that truth to unpack it. If you want to know more than just that veneer explanation, it can be found there. And it's done because that's actually that interpretation is intricately important. It's an invocation. It's an invocation of a supreme fucking knowledge. It all goes back to Anadwana and her signature. She who wrote the first author in history that identified themselves. Vanity. She couldn't create an error. So she put men in stone contract. Sumerian was the common language of all of the Mesopotamian and Akkadian Empire, and Akkadian was the language of the state. And if you wanted to get any kind of peace from the state, you would go to a temple, and the priests or priestesses, however they identified, would speak to the state, and you would get your peace and logic back from them and balance. And they would follow a couple codes that they had at that time, and they evolved from the Hammurabi Code, the rules of Ma'at, all of these different rules. They're fairly consistent in interpretation, though. But again, it's through today's words that we've translated them. An example of the power of how we lose that in the spelling, reference to the letter J and how it confuses us, is again, for example, the Alpha and the Omega. And that's been interpreted by John of Greek. But Jesus wasn't. And literal interpretation is important. So now you're talking about the Aleph and Tav, then. And then the Tav's the mark, and the mark is an X or a cross, like this or like this. And it's 10, 1, and 0. What is nothing? Define nothing. There is no definition and no thing. No thing, not even a picture, like an egg. 1, and that 10 is a perception, a seeded perception. And that's the perception in new creation that goes on thereafter. That's why they call 11 the angel code. It was the 11th son is Joseph, and he was the dreamer.
with the
And he
technical,
wore a dream coat. And the dream coat gave a fucking veneer of perception of what was inside him, his wick. Because the flame, the perception, the idea, the light bulb, the yod, which is the right hand of God, it looks like a flame, a little blue flame, which we now call period. And there's also the 10th character is J. It's language has been developed so that it can make sense forwards, backwards, up and down. It's a magic cube. It's a limit. And so everybody that functions in state title functions in that cube. And if you try to get them to acknowledge anything outside that fucking box, one square, they have to reinterpret the whole fucking cube again. Every square has a different number value thereafter. It's a very complex thing to do. That's why it's taken us from the creation of the letter I to now to be as lost as we are. The Greeks speak of it too. Medusa. Medusa was a serpentine, which speaks to a tribe of people that wrote. Female-ish being, entity that looked upon man and turned him into stone, scratched his name into a clay tablet and put it to one side and owned him on the record. Should he ever come wandering into their jurisdiction, they'd seize him by that stone. It was destroyed by who? Perseus. Perseus. Right? Perseus. And he did it through reflection. And if you reflect diction, it reverses it, doesn't it? And Perseus in reverse is Sue's rep. So our modern interpretation of these stories, they make sense in all directions if you look at it. And this is what made Mozart such an interesting character, because he was really he really lit a little bit too. He opened the arcs a little bit on the spectrum of knowledge, and like through his art. It was amazing. And we're going through that kind of type of awakening right now with what we are, what the symbols are, and everything that we write. It all means something. It's all spells. It's all a spelling. What does a spell do? It creates a perception of reality. Penn and Teller amaze you with everything that's natural. It's just you haven't been exposed to certain elements, so your brain cannot make a logic of why the time delay between this hand and this hand and all the elements that made it take place, like whether there's copper and magnets involved and all kinds of things that you just commonly don't see. Therefore, you can't rationalize it. And the quickest, hey, Google, answer is, that's amazing. That's magic. How did you do that? Maybe if I fuck you, I'll learn. They live a life like that. They live that life like that. They amaze people and manipulate them. Hypnotism's the same thing. People are really good at doing it. Lawyers are actors. They're actors. They represent a character on stage. Judges are actors too. They step into a role and they play it, and then they step out of it when they get out of their office.
Precisely. So we all need to be held.
It's a theater. It's the court's called a theater. When I was going on tours, we were always told we're going to a theater of conflict, and our first objective was hearts and minds. If I work in a 3-man recce element, I'm not running. People think soldiers run around killing people by them. No, fuck no, man. Why? You get into an element of an environment, if you're outnumbered greatly amongst a population of people, you begin to endear yourself to them. You don't beat them with a stick. You fucking you show them how to find water, how to cure an infection, and you become valuable to them where their state fails. And then you teach them how to sharpen their claws and teeth
and become dependent
for a while until you snap the collar on, and ultimately they become, yeah, that's the way it works. That's the way it's done. That's the way it was shown. Like, yeah, it's like that's the transition to peacekeeping was about preventing the damage and still getting the same outcome without the destruction.
Yeah. Well, this is what we need to do, but we have so much conflict in community, just even within us who step into those public roles sometimes and always live in our private capacity first and foremost, regardless, which is why we are meant to be the conscience of the corpse that we work on behalf of when we do. The corpse is heartless.
Well, in the freedom movement, what I call what the freedom movement is, I think it's going through an evolution right now was highly predictable.
Yeah.
because in the beginning it was very easy for everybody to rally under one thing, and everybody was just starving for connection. So like that was just a right moment that was beautifully exploited. And actually, I think that it was intended to turn out a different way, and elements within prevented that from happening, perhaps, and from all different directions too. But now that that's gone, happened, and done its thing, camps have evolved. There's people that are bold and they're speakers, and then they have the people that stand with them because they don't want to be the one that's the speaker, but they want to support something, so they ally themselves with that. And that group of people, their egos will blindly follow the one that gives them the demonstration of the most path forward. It doesn't matter if it's correct or not. It could be a path to nowhere, but if it seems like it's going somewhere, they'll herd them correctly. Now, in that, higher elements in our intelligence spectrum, I can promise you, are dividing these individuals and saying, we don't need to worry about that one. They're going to a dead end. We don't need to worry about that one. They're going to a dead end. And they narrow down their targets about who are. So you're going to know how close to the truth you are based on what your interpretation of the investment of resistance that you face. I've never affiliated myself directly under any. I made my own banner and I keep it for myself. I've up to this point never sold a shirt or nothing like that. I give them to people. If you got arrested with me on one of my events, I went out and gave you a $200 hockey jersey as a souvenir of the moment. But never did I take anything from anybody, and I think that was important too, because again, if you allow yourself to profit from this journey, if you become intrinsically dependent on the money that you're generating by perpetuating this fight, but you'll never want the fight to end. There's a famous British gangster. He's dead now, Frankie Fraser. He's a half Canadian Indian guy, and he was quite a scoundrel in England. And he said at the end of the World War, he was incredibly upset at Hitler because it was the best days of his life. Because he made so much money profiting off of running around looting stuff and selling under black market, things like that. I know when I was in Bosnia, I watched people that had nothing open up a garden shed across the street from a camp and make a fortune off pirated porn on CD-ROMs, like fucking $3 or three Deutschmark a CD, and they would sell out daily. How we interpret survival, how we survive, all of that. It's interesting when you. In the tours that I wear, they weren't hot tight like in the Afghanistan sense. They were hot, but incredibly interesting to watch people reassemble after an event like that and assess the humanity in it and how the decisions were made moment to moment. And then coming back home and then now seeing what we're going through, and I see a lot of parallels right now. I see a lot of parallels that kind of scare me right now, especially around the control of language and this abandonment of one of our processes of law. There's no Bible when you get to a cell. If you just let the police grab you, walk off to the cruiser, and you sit down in a cell, you won't see a Bible there. And the reason why is because you've already understood and gave up your rights curbside when they read them to you. And 98% of the people do. And that's their objective. They come into it with that objective, that bias.
Well, this is what we're
So
taking.
respecting the oath is no longer present. The way our Constitution is written, if I'm blind, deaf, dumb, and missing all my limbs, if I wiggle my pecker in the air, it is immediately interpreted that I am in my full capacity and presumed as such, unless I am incapable of anything. And then it's only under implied consent to return me to my consciousness or lucid capacity in which to communicate in some form. We've forgotten all that. We don't even think about it. You watch these, classic example, if you were to take an auditorium of people and run a blue line arrest clip where the police are considered in the correctness, biasly, because the way that the podcaster presents it. And you played that in front of a theater and said, everybody write down all the things that you think the police did wrong in that. The answers that you would get back would be incredibly interesting. If you had a lawyer faithfully and in good faith interpret how correct that mass was and their interpretation, you'd be shocked with the answer that you have. How little people know. We feel that to say something offending is arrestable. It's not. No. You see a cop walking down the street, not that I suggest you do, and I don't think you should, but you are allowed to go, fuck you, fuck you. You can do that. You're allowed to. It's the next freedom of expression. You're not hurting them. You're telling them your opinion, and you're allowed to do that.
But the amount of
We're supposed to be able to do that because then they know they're not fucking doing their job rights by the grander perspective or not.
well, the people are not aware of the energetic implications of what you've just said, though, as well. Because when you do direct some venom in your words or the tonation of the expression of them, it is activating energy in us and the other, which is ultimately going to either allow us
Well,
to be
to
more
that I would say,
of
to,
the
to that I would say, is it more or less acceptable to talk to you nicely and inject venom directly into your arm?
why do we need to poison one another generally?
Well, I'm saying you're saying that because you're suggesting that because of the energy that I put into that example where I do all this, that I have committed an offense. And in
No.
fact, I haven't. I've gestured and I cast an opinion. And if my feelings and emotion are cast at the same time, that's fine. And it's not as offensive as telling you, listen, this is only for your own good and it's going to help others. And I stick a poison into your arm.
What
See,
I'm
that's where the difference is because you're physically being breached.
I hear you. And what I'm trying to say is not specifically that you were offensive. I'm saying your expression and the passion that you expressed it with reflects the fact that people are not commonly considering the implications of how that passion actually creates soul ties and connections to those who things of emotion are directed at, such as the man known as Justin Trudeau acting as Prime Minister of the Corporation of Canada, for instance. The amount of venom and anger and everything that goes into the blame program of the monarch slave program that is trauma based to trigger us using trigger words into these expanded states of energy that need to move because we didn't move it before. I'm just sharing the lack of awareness most people have of the energy that is moving with passion. And
So we're programmed in conflict resolution as children through school and pretty much all the way through life that calmness and coolness denotes confidence and correctness. And therefore, if somebody's in a panic or they're speaking in haste or they're in anxiety, we interpret that as off. They're off the rails. We'll make them calm down and come back again. And that's actually, if you're interacting with a person that's actually in a point of suicidalness, and when we're talking about mental health, probably one of the worst things you can do. But we perceive it as that. And is it correct? And so again, the reason why we are perceiving it like this is because the system moves at a pace again that it doesn't want to slow down. We mitigate fucking empathy. Our rubber souls are fucking, that's what they do to us. It's part of it. The frequency that we listen to our music in does it as well. It keeps us in the left brain thought process, which is just fucking moment to moment. Your subconscious can multitask. That's mostly in your right brain thinking. So if you have your subconscious programmed correctly, then in the moment in a panic, you interpret more correctly. Does that make sense? That's why I'm saying that from first contact to couch thing that I'm trying to design for people to speak to the state at the earliest level in order to preserve their jurisdiction to the point that they can get out of a cell on bail, sit on a couch, and lucidly make a decision as to whether it's wiser to use one of the two options, which would be civil or not. Because at the moment, when you're all stressed out and under arrest on the tail end of a dynamic whatever situation, is probably one of your worst days of the week for sure. Having you make a decision in which capacity you're standing in like that is it's not, it was never meant to be like that. When your liberty was taken, they took you to a cell and your timeout was with a Bible. You would relax and you would look at that and you would say, okay, I stand under these values in front of the justice of the peace in this matter. And if nobody was hurt and there's no smoke still in the skyline and the horizon or dead, then you would be probably let go because it's summary in nature. You were screaming and hollering at your neighbors and you scared somebody's kid and fucking that would be about it. But now, when the police roll into those, when you watch those clips of a guy that scares someone and the kid's screaming and hollering because he's stressed out, it escalates from fucking here, we just want to talk to you, to resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer, damage to a police car door. And all of a sudden, this guy's in a tsunami of destruction.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't need to be that way because, and it's all been fomented as a design. Vampires sucking that guy's life tickets that he earned, and the punishment's the process.
Yeah. Well, it takes our life to deal with it. So, um, yeah, this has been a tremendous amount of information, and I think it's very valuable for people to bear witness to such conversations and for us to participate in these kind of conversations, which will be happening more in the new year. I also believe that I do think that we need to really have the model of how to actually not create a parallel society, but to see that we are playing five-dimensional chess on multiverses, which are multi-timelines simultaneously. And so every move that we're making are moving others in other spaces too, because of the relationships we have with one another. And we all have relationships with people in different capacities. And I do believe that there is a framework that we need to figure out how to actually have that is not domination based, that will allow us to actually hold dominion over the lands, air, and water, and be accountable, responsible, and also held liable for choice to poison others, which include the earth that we're living in or on. So I say this from the perspective that when we're very well versed in what has been, we can get trapped down those rabbit holes that keep us moving towards the foxhole that requires so much energy in order to figure out how to track in the first place, that we really want to catch it when we find the hole we think will lead to the treasure. But I think that there is an element to doing it in community, which is why I'm grateful for your willingness to have this conversation and to share what contributions you have today, because it has been very valuable, I do believe, and would love to hear the comments that people who listen back to this conversation share. So, on that note, 1 minute before the 2 hour mark of when we connected in the first place, is there anything that you might want to share as a summation point, given we've been talking about summary art, summary offenses?
Yeah, thanks. No, I appreciate that. I appreciate also that some of the things I said in here, I don't know if I managed to keep it in a consistent thread. I hope I did. But everything I said is true. I've had a lawyer confirm to me that reference the searches going into the courthouse, the unlawfulness, that was about actus reus. I never got to say that at the end of that. That when they search you at the courthouse, when they're coming in, they're getting you under a presumption of carrying something. And if you consent that is, then you've removed your presumption of innocence on entry. And that falls under actus reus and the consideration past that point. So these are how those tricks work. And if you understand how to speak to them, and that removes the panic. And as I said before, everybody's programmed that confidence and composure and candor has a credibility that stands on its own in a lot of ways. So this helps people when they're aware of what that's present, and they can speak to the agent across from them and let them know that what they're doing thereafter is omnipotence, and they're providing you no other choice. You have something to stand on afterwards to argue about. Like, as long as you have something to speak to, you have a chip in a chair, and as long as you have a chip in a chair, you're not found guilty yet, and you haven't been painted into a corner yet. You're always looking for that next chip right now. You
So
know,
the final point that I want to make off of what you just make is the fact that arguments are made within courts where warring territories are being fought for. And the territories of us are the real territories or the real estate being fought for. But
you are the battlefield.
we are the battlefield. But our Gu, but like in French, gur is very close to the gu, it seems. And so argument is of the mind. So that was just kind of a little fun word breakdown of argument, given that it is used within the legalese system and
And the
language.
Magi, and Magi AR is star as well. It's associated with the star.
AR.
Ishtar. Yeah.
Oh,
And the Magi, Persian Magi influence of jurisdiction. AR, letters, certain letters, HR, AR, it's all associated to Ishtar, which is the little star.
okay, well, we're gonna get you and my friend Rosemary, who painted my soul painting in the back there,
Yeah.
together with others who are able to go deeper into the mythos that have led to the ideologies that we have collectively been giving our consciousness to the collective consciousness of for long enough to see that it's not really in our best interest to continue going on with a pirate ship that requires our energy for it to exist off of us. So, figuring out what to do about that keeps us in our head when the heart is where we actually start vibrationally embodying the energetic signature that helps those who are so locked into the pattern of what has been that they can feel the difference then when we embody the difference, and then it would be more likely them come towards us or gravitate towards us when we feel safe enough for them to see an option vibrationally that the rational mind will not allow us to find within the ration of lies that is there.
Yep. Be aware of the prefix re.
Yes. Okay, we'll go deeper into that another time. Thank you again, Jay. It was awesome to
Take care and love to everybody that's watching.
uh,
Cheers.
the Solvogay. Say it again. Solvogay.
Selgovae.
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 Selgovae. Selgovae tribe. Very fascinating. And what does it? What's it? I always want to say Slytherin, but that's not what it is. What is the?
What's my family or what's the given name that I have that's associated to that? Is that what
Yeah.
you mean?
Uh,
Slesser.
Flexer. Okay, because it was the.
Slesser.
Okay, and then there's but there's another one that was connected. You'd said it earlier as well, and it strikes me.
Silures. The Silure tribe of southern Wales. That's where they were rooted out of.
Right.
Yeah, they were so when Rome pushed into Wales and pushed Caradocus back and captured him with the Silure tribe, they dispersed the Silures and scattered them. And my lineage of them made their way up into the Firth and Aberdeenshire area and settled in there and became mixed with Viking and Norwegian settlers as well, and we became the Selgovae. And it goes back to there's waves. If you go through the Irish myths and you talk about the different waves of settlers into the Britain and Ireland, it becomes interesting because you're getting into the Pathalons and the Formidians, the Firbolgs, the Tuatha and on the Milesians, and all these different waves parallel biblical events and historical events like Troy and things like that. Yeah. Yeah, it gets pretty cool and deep. And we've lost that. And we've lost that because every time you change something in that book we call the Bible, you take us a step further from truth. And the degree off of truth today in 100 years will be 15 degrees. In 250 years, etc. Just that the pie gets bigger and bigger and bigger from the truth.
Game of
Yeah.
telephone. So yeah, that's very true. That's awesome. All right. Thanks again,
All
Jaya.
right. See you later.